tying these two issues together, what possibility is there for cooperation on issues of alternative energy that involves both countries? The complex constitutional and political issues are Mexico's issue and debate. But the ability of the U.S. to provide a partnership or to enter in a partnership on alternative energy issues or on new approaches to energy is something that may benefit both countries. We tend to look at this in a sequential way, development in advanced industrial countries, and then usage in developing economies. With alternative energy, that is not necessarily the case. There can be pioneering in other economies. This is an issue that is critical for both countries and where there is considerable and not always obvious overlap.
I think in Mexican case, we are looking for strategical decisions about how are we going to manage the oil and the energy. But in this macro discussion of the property of the oil and the constitutional basis of the oil management and the energetical sector, we are losing a lot of time and opportunities without these basic definitions in other fields that we haven't discussed because we have stopped and paralyzed on this. The diversification of the energetic sources is strategic for Mexico. We have a great aeolic, solar, geothermic, biomass, oceanic potential in Mexico, not just hydrocarbons potential, but we are just focused our strategy in the oil. So we are richer in those sources more than the oil, but we are not taking the opportunity, we are not developing any kind of policy on the future of the generation. That focus requires strategical movements that we must do today, not in the future. Today, and we are not doing those movements.
I found that in the United States, this issue has risen from maybe where it used to be 10th on the political scale of importance with people. It's up there in the top 3 or 4 now. And that's because I think it was something what Martha said, it's not only a moral imperative for the future, but it is really a key piece of the economic revitalization, piece that we talked about, your husband talked about last night so eloquently. I mean, the new energy economy, it seems to me that we're in sort of these embryonic stages of it right now in Mexico and the United States, whereas other countries, as Dan has indicated, have moved quicker and beyond. And if we're going to change these economies in fundamental ways to keep pace, I think we've got to recognize that we are probably now where the information economy was in maybe the late 1970s. And we have to see that and recognize that and grasp it. Now, having said that, let me just really quickly, and then I will end because I know others have to speak. One of the opportunities I think working together, both the United States and Mexico can do is open up this, and Rafael, I come back to this every year I come here, is the North American Free Trade Agreement and opening it up based upon working together on an issue like energy and the global economy that we live in and how it's affected by climate change. That was one of the things that was left out that we argued so vociferously against when the agreement went into effect. We talked briefly last night about what the Europeans did with respect to the European Union. It started as basically on coal, on energy, right? So why can't we pick that up and move ahead as in a cooperative sense on something that will help with our economies, that will move us forward in a cooperative sense, and that really has, at least in the United States, and I suspect growing interest and strength here in Mexico, an interest on the part of the populace to move forward.
The science clearly says that if you use agricultural land or use land that's nature right now, that there's essentially no cases that are really a carbon winner. Financially, there are huge winners, right? And we have a massive subsidy in the United States for making corn into ethanol, which is the worst single piece of ag policy I have ever seen anywhere, including transmigration in Borneo, including all kinds of things. It is the single worst because it's the most distortionary and it sends every wrong signal to what to do. Until we get at those issues. And California has great paperwork, once again. We have a low carbon fuel standard that says we're not going to pick corn ethanol or soy or sugarcane. We're going to require the greenhouse gas content of each liter of fuel to go down. But doing it on paper and doing this in practice, where you have to sort of label and follow the thread. Where did this ethanol come from? Who was its mother and father? Where did it get to the market? This is a process that we're not ready to do. And so that's why I say the market incentives and policy are so far ahead of what the science tells us that I would do anything. I would put a brake on this process. The federal government in the U.S. has now a 35 billion gallon requirement for ethanol. Of that, about 15 billion of that can be for corn, the thing we know is an awful biofuel by every analysis. So the financial incentives are very far ahead. I would argue that actually the places right now where the most amount of venture capital money, the most investment is excited, is in wind and in solar thermal. And northern Mexico could be feeding the United States solar thermal at incredibly low prices with no risk, with a financial market around carbon when it evolves, that will just add to the profits. And so there are some really impressive plays out there. There's impressive offshore wind, but I think right now the solar thermal area, and that's one that any industrial company, doesn't have to be a real company, could be a big player. So the biofuels is this nasty mess right now, but there are some real opportunities out there that avoid that in the short term until the science catches up with how are we really going to start certifying every bit of biofuels.